rails going off. If any of you are musicians, I'd love if you made a theme song for us. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Off the Rails. This week, I'm going to take a look at phone photography. Phone phonographers. Phonographers? Is that a word? My mom used to be a stenographer. That's just a little tidbit that rhymes. So I'm going to look at 19 photos here taken from a mobile phone, and I want to just go through some brief guidelines, if you will, on essentially which situations to avoid when you're shooting with a phone and which situations to embrace or look out for. I mean, it really comes down to your conditions and, of course, you know, your framing and your story. And it really doesn't so much matter what gear you're using. It's, I think, more important to know what the limitations of your gear are, what limitations of your gear is, and whichever one was correct. Like when you're shooting with a phone, you just have to understand, like, there's certain things that you should just not be doing, like shooting indoors, shooting in low light conditions, any kind of low light conditions. And what you should be embracing is the opposite, is shooting outdoors, a lot of light. Basically, your phone has poor ISO quality. In general, low level or entry level cameras, DSLR cameras and the like, the reason they're entry level, the reason they're cheaper versus more expensive, more quote unquote professional cameras is the ISO sensitivity. Meaning, an entry level camera or a mobile phone camera today, when you're shooting in low light and the ISO has to be bumped up, like here the ISO is 1600, you're going to get what's called noise, right? It's called sensor noise. You see it really clearly here, all of this grain, and that's just due to the fact that the sensor isn't strong enough, isn't powerful enough, is not sensitive enough, so it has to compensate for this digitally, which introduces this dirt, noise, grain, excuse me, call it what you want. A higher level camera, like a full frame camera, not that full frame is better, but the full frame cameras are generally have better sensors. Those have better ISO, low light performance. So the ISO sensitivity will introduce less grain, yielding a clearer picture even under low light conditions. However, if you take a photo like this with a phone, with an entry-level camera, or with a $3,000 full-frame camera, the photos are not going to be all that different. What we're not seeing a lot of digital noise here at all, if any, and the photo is relatively sharp. The color is relatively nice, and this is just a photo taken with a mobile phone in the right conditions. So that's your guideline number one. Embrace light. Find as much light as possible and shoot during very light conditions. Daytime, outdoors. Avoid indoors, evening time, low light conditions. So let's see what that looks like. We already showed you this example, and you see it's just so dark. We're losing detail. Zooming in like this is a bit extreme, but I'm trying to show you that it's not just like blurry, it's muddy, right? We're seeing a lot of this digital noise, and we're just not seeing any crisp lines. We're not seeing detail. We're seeing all of this grain. Okay, over here. Okay, this is even worse because it's a low light situation with a bunch of hot lights really strong light. So the strong light's just pure white. You're completely losing the detail, including on like this person's face. I'm going to zoom in a lot. I know it's a bit extreme, but my point is, you look, it's just white. Like there's no face there. Your brain is telling you that it's a face, but digitally it's just white. And then if we zoom in here, also we're not seeing faces. It almost looks like a cartoon, right? Your brain is telling you that that's a person, that's a face, but we're not seeing any detail here. So definitely in a low light, high contrast situation where you have bright lights in a dark area, then that's going to be even worse. Here's another example. Here in the shadows, we're seeing very little detail, right? Everybody's just kind of a mush. Looks like an oil painting. And here in the highlights, again, we're just totally losing all this data. Like we can't even see this wall. It's just a pure white. And again, this guy's face, we're not seeing a nose. We're not seeing eyes. It's just white. So these are examples of your phone camera straining under low light conditions. Another concept of your phone straining is shutter speed, right? So here, this shutter is 1/30. Again, you're not really able to manually adjust all of your settings on a phone. So that is an added challenge. And when you're shooting things with action, like cars moving or children being children, what you're going to get is this blur because your phone camera cannot keep up, which I'm not going to get into, but basically it's also has to do with being indoors. If this guy was shot outdoors, then you would probably freeze the action like this guy. This is shot outdoors, but the shutter is super fast, and perhaps this person had it on sport mode or action mode, and we're actually seeing water droplets. So you have not only more leeway with your ISO sensitivity when shooting outdoors, but you also have more leeway with a shutter speed. The second thing I want to point out, so the first one is, avoid low light. Just avoid low light, avoid indoors, avoid evening. Shoot outdoors, daytime, and embrace light. The second thing is high contrast areas. I think this is less talked about, but this is a good example to show. If you don't understand it, that's fine. But I just want to point out high contrast area is where you have very light lights and very dark darks. For example, this tree in the foreground in front of a very bright condition, which is outside. That's a high contrast situation. And these trees are silhouetted. But it's not the silhouette that bugs me. It's this kind of weird gray interpretation that the camera gives it because it can't deal with this high contrast. So we're getting like this muddy gray, again, just no details, and it's not sharp either like a nice silhouette would be. It's just kind of a weird interpretation of the scene by your phone camera. Off topic a little bit, but I just wanted to point out these two. I don't mean to call you out, but in general, you don't want to take a photo of somebody else's art. You don't want to take a photo of a photo. You don't want to take a photo of a video that somebody did. You don't even want to take a photo of a sculpture that somebody did because you're not really creating something new. You're more at most documenting something, but when there's zero context, you're just kind of copying something. So while this is cool and it looks like wall art, some kind of graffiti on brick, your photo isn't introducing anything more than what this artist already did. So you're essentially presenting this artist's work as yours, but really you're just capturing it frame to frame. Now, if there was a person in front of this wall, or if there was a person perhaps playing accordion, sitting down over here in the corner, that would be a good photo that you're incorporating this artist's work with a real life condition. But just capturing frame to frame somebody else's work is it's borderline copying. You're not really, this person could commission a photographer to come and take a photo of their work so they have a digital copy so that they could sell. You know what I mean? Like, that's where this would come in, that for their own copyright. So avoid taking a photo of a photo of a TV. This is just what looks like to me a photo of a television. So again, it's not a photograph. You're not, perhaps if you were there and taking a photo of the stage, but here you're just taking a photo of somebody else's work. This isn't your work. And if this was something, if you took a video, for example, of a movie, that's illegal. That's somebody else's work that you're showing as yours. So I don't mean to call you out. I'm just giving examples because we have seen this come up a little bit recently. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. If that's obvious, cool. If not, hopefully learn something. We'll move on. Again, low light, lots of detail, and slow shutter speed, although it kind of works there. It's kind of cool. And here, like, you're doing your best, but the phone is just going to strain indoors. And if we zoom in, you see like there's just a loss of detail. I mean, it almost looks like it's animated, like it's a cartoon. That's not a filter that you put on. That's just the sensor struggling because there's not enough light in the scene to capture this with good details. Here are some examples of nice and sharp photos that I think yield a very nice quality picture taken with a mobile phone in the right conditions. So here we have beautiful sunlight coming in, and we don't see any like cartoon effect here. In fact, we're not seeing any noise, even when we zoom in. Not really seeing any grain here. Perhaps you had this softened a bit, but I think this is well done. The focus does seem to be a little bit more on the back fence, but we'll leave that critique aside for now. Here again, very sharp, in focus, nice color, letting a lot of light in, and we're getting a cool frozen shot here of the water. Here again, we have nice, this is practically outside, and the shadows are creating a cool effect here. And I think you are seeing detail. It's a little bit soft, like a little bit dirty, but you're seeing all the detail. You're seeing an eyes, nose, mouth. You're seeing a person's face. When you zoom in, it's not getting lost. Here's another good example. Here's another example. The sky's a little bit dark, but this is a nice example of your phone has enough data here to work with, has enough light to work with. Again, here, midday, maybe a little bit too harsh because we're losing the floor here. But I mean, you look at the stone, we're getting some nice detail on the stone. No cartoon effect happening. Again, another really nice example. And you see just how sharp this lens is. Look, you see the thread here. Suddenly we're seeing a lot of detail from a phone. And this is really, you see the nicks, there's nothing getting lost here. And this is just because it was shot in really nice light, probably very bright light. The phone used here, iPhone 6s, all right? This is not the latest and the greatest. This is not known for the best camera in the world. It's just shot under the ideal condition. And this is an interesting example where I'm assuming it's not outdoors, but shot under a very bright light as seen by the EXIF. The ISO is very low and we're getting a very clear image because of that. There's a little bit of highlights blown over here because it was close to the light source, but you see just how clear everything is. It's not muddy, not super muddy, not super grainy. And I'm seeing the ISO at 50, very low ISO. Shot with an iPhone 8 Plus. Again, it's not the gear. This is just this scenario. And here's another outside scenario, which I think works really nicely. We see some nice detail. And finally, this one really caught my eye, and I had to check to see how this was shot with a phone because it has all of the indications of a DSLR, right? It has all the indications of a prime lens, wide aperture. We have this beautiful bokeh in the background, right? We're actually seeing bokeh, actually seeing like these circles here, and there's a beautiful depth of field going on. There's also some really nice detail on this girl's face, assuming it's a girl. Really lovely detail. We're seeing like really sharp details on the finger. So I was just wondering, like, wow, how is this phone performing so much better than all these other phones? By the way, this is an iPhone XR. I'm not really familiar with that model, but I think it's a cheaper version of the XS, one of the more recent ones that came out. And I realized that it is shot in what they call portrait mode. I don't know what the terminology is exactly. And that creates this fake bokeh depth of field where the camera calculates where the subject is, and then it actually creates a blur in the background, a really nice blur in the background that looks like bokeh, to emulate a much higher quality lens, which I think is a really cool effect. However, upon closer inspection, we do see some irregularities. For example, the bow, which is on the same plane of field, right? Which should stretch from her finger, which is super in focus, across here, which is super in focus, across, the camera or the computer thought that this was now part of the background. It just kind of applied this whole area as a bokeh, but it doesn't make sense that this bow over here, that this part would suddenly be all the way behind her, that it would be blurry like that. Likewise, when you start to inspect the edges, especially right here in the thumb, we're seeing almost like amateur Photoshop work. I know this wasn't done in Photoshop, but the camera or the computer is doing its best inside your phone to in real time, figure out these outlines and blur and what's foreground, what's background. So we start to see this breakdown of information. So this wouldn't really pass for a professional photo. And I think printed out, you would start to see these imperfections and it just looks a bit wonky. So at a glance, in your gallery, sharing with friends, it's impressive. And this is a really nice photo and really nice framing. And I'm not taking anything away from the photographer. It's quite beautiful. But just know there is a trade-off. Like it's not there yet, this technology. It's not quite there yet. I think it will be though, which is kind of scary. I think it definitely will catch up. And us as professional photographers will have a much harder time pointing out why you shouldn't be using a phone or what its drawbacks are. Not today, though. And I'm not nixing that, and I'm not saying it's way in the future. I think it's much closer than we think, but not yet. With that said, I do think that phones will absolutely catch up and will be better than the best DSLR camera that's out there today. And that's going to change the dynamic of what it means to be a photographer. And I think the importance of good framing like this, composition like this, and story like this perhaps, will separate what we'll call photographers from phonographers in the future. So I hope that was helpful, and thanks so much, guys, for all of you who are contributing to our project on Patreon. If you haven't already, go check out patreon.com/52frames to see a video like this every week. Every single week I put out a video called Off the Rails, which is just some ideas off the top of my head. I go through some of your photographs. I go through some Photoshop tips or tricks that I learned. I give you a behind the scenes of something I shot recently, or I just give you updates or news that's going on in the project itself. If you are new to the project, do go to 52frames.com to join our free weekly photography challenge project. And yeah, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Until next week, happy shooting.